Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 25 series, Can We Save the Oakland A's? And we are at the start of free agency in the 2036 to 2037 offseason. As we've talked about in previous episodes, our Oakland A's are coming off of a World Series championship, and we are returning almost everyone significant from that squad. So we are not anticipating that this is going to be a particularly active free agent period for us, which is a good thing since we don't really have all that much money to spend either. Did start off last episode by making one offer to an international free agent, and going to start this episode off by talking about that and one other topic that has come up in the comments to the previous episode. We were able to offer a minor league contract to Federico Aldana, 26, soon to be 27-year-old out of Cuba. Like his personality traits, he's a very mediocre defensive corner outfielder, not a ton of speed, but he does look like a guy that could have tremendous home run power. Only average in terms of our scouting accuracy on him, but given that all he was looking for initially is a minor league contract, we're more than happy to give that to him, even though it's going to be about 3 weeks till we get our updated scouting report. Both Avery Shaham and Calvin Ha were supportive of going after Aldana. I'm hoping that he'll just sign the minor league deal, which will increase our flexibility and control with him. But if he does come back and says he wants something more, hopefully we'll have a scouting report by that time and we'll be able to figure out whether or not it's a good move. But appreciate the scouting reports from Avery and Calvin to hopefully help us ultimately make a good decision on what we do with Mr. Aldana. And the other topic that we discussed in the previous episode that generated a fair amount of commentary from the worldwide scouting department was our trade of Levi Sterling. As we talked about, we had to include, depending on how you look at it, 2 or 3 decent prospects along with Sterling to basically just get nothing in return and get his contract off the books. Holdor hates it. Paul West, Calvin Ha, and Fake Name were all kind of okay-ish with it to fine with it. Just want to go in a little more depth on my thought process around the trade. I'm not trying to convince Hodor to love the trade, but just kind of wanted to talk through what I was thinking. The contract for Sterling, he's got guaranteed numbers of $4 to $5 million for the next 4 years through his mid-30s, and then a team option for the final season. So he's going to be with Seattle or somebody with guaranteed money for 4 to 5 years. And although when we signed Sterling to that 8-year, $29 million deal, we were hoping he would be a maybe 4th or 5th starter for us. If not that, we were hoping at least he'd be a pretty good reliever for us. And honestly, it really hasn't happened. He had the one great year. Well, I don't know if it's a great year, but the one very good year in 2033 at the age of 26. 10-6 record, 9 saves, a 3.10 ERA over 98 and 2/3 innings, in 10.7 strikeouts per 9 innings with a 1.6 WAR. But over the other 5 years of his career, he's actually been below replacement level because his career WAR is just 1.3. And at the age of 30 now, he's coming off of the worst season in his career with a minus 0.7 WAR. So I get the point that the contract is not crippling in terms of its dollar amount, but I think we've been pretty pragmatic across the course of this playthrough. We've made a lot of early contract offers to people, and some of them have worked out incredibly well for us. We think about the first several years of Tyler Soderstrom. We think about Luis Lara. We think about more recently Jake Ortega and Alejandro Landin. Andy Toribio, our shortstop, and hopefully going forward, the deals that we have recently signed are Turo Uresti and Jesus Saldana to. So we've done reasonably well over the course of this playthrough, rolling the dice on contracts with players in the very early stages of their major league careers, or in some cases, before they had even played a major league game. But I think the other thing that we've also done reasonably well is we've cut our losses when some of those contracts just weren't working. I think there's fewer examples of that. I would argue that trading away Sterling is an example of that now. You think about the trade that we did last year, getting out of Bobby Cabral before he got even more expensive. And then you think back a couple of seasons ago, Kevin Stubblefield is a guy that came up through our organization that we thought we'd be building around at first base for many years, signed him to a long-term extension, and when it just wasn't working out, we cut bait. And none of the dollar amounts for any of the players I just mentioned were huge. But when you're dealing with a team like the A's, where you've got the second lowest budget in baseball, and at this point, $100 million payroll, $4 or $5 million for a guy like Sterling is 5% of our budget, or our payroll, more accurately. Paying 5, 6, 7 million for a guy like Cabral is 5, 6, 7% of our payroll. And if those guys aren't producing the way I want, my inclination is to try to preserve this very precious resource of the limited money that we have with Oakland. So that was the rationale to get it off the books, to get Sterling off the books. As far as Hold Doors feedback, I get the point that we perhaps had paid too high a price. I'm not particularly optimistic that Savion Cohen's is going to become a big-time player. Luis Coronado was a former very high draft pick for us. I think he's a very versatile player with good speed, but looking at that bat and looking at the 68 WRC plus he just put up in AAA in the year that he turned 24, I really look Coronado as a utility infielder, kind of best case scenario. Now, with the decent base running ability, with the fact that he's a left-handed hitter who can play middle infield positions, kind of unique, but still a utility guy as far as I'm concerned. Tim Killeen is the guy that, if his stuff really develops, I could lead to regret moving on from. I still like getting Sterling off the books and saving in the area of $20 million for the next 4 seasons. But a 23-year-old who touches triple digits on the radar gun potentially will have outstanding stuff and has had a sub-2 ERA every stop of his career over the last 2 years in the low to mid minors. Didn't love including him in the deal, but felt like it was something that I needed to do. The other things that factored into the trade away of Sterling, we've been talking about this for a couple seasons now, but we had built up a pitching staff with a lot of guys with below average control. Part of that was that we haven't been able to apparently develop control among our pitchers very well in this playthrough. But given that Sterling's coming off of a year where the control was still an issue with almost a walk every 2 innings and a sickly 12 homers allowed in 65 and a third innings pitched, and he's had a pretty sickly home run allowed rate each of the last 3 years, we're pretty content moving on from Mr. Sterling. And the other thing that factored into my decision making is with the trades and cuts and guys that we've allowed to hit free agency since the end of the past season. We've cut our secondary roster to 35 players. But I believe everyone that I included in the trade, or at least the 3 younger guys that I included in the trade, were all going to need to be protected before the Rule 5 draft, which is coming up in about 3 or 4 weeks. And when I look at Rule 5 eligible players here, you can see Amari Alcindor, Daniel Blanco, Joe Harmon, Chuck Huntley, Wilson Pedraza. We've talked about several of these prospects over the years, and then even guys who might not have the same ceiling, but Albert Badia, Nate Bennett, Juan Campos, there's definitely Mike Graves, spent a big pick on him several years ago. There's obviously a lot of 4A guys as well. Sam Lishman is a guy we've invested in over the years. Dan Nolan, an interesting shortstop. He was a 10th round pick, so not as high a priority as some of these other guys. But I kind of felt like the guys that we were willing to include in the trade are guys that I'm probably not going to be protecting from the Rule 5 draft and conceivably could have lost for nothing. So the fact that they did help me get Mr. Sterling off the books makes it worthwhile in my opinion, since we're probably not even going to be able to save everyone that is still on our team who's Rule 5 eligible, and we'll just be crossing our fingers that we don't lose some of those guys in the upcoming Rule 5 draft. Just putting a bow on things, Holdor did mention, it's certainly possible if we hadn't done the trade in early November and we were a bit more patient over the next month and a half till we got to the Rule 5 trade or the Rule 5 deadline, perhaps we might have been able to make a trade where we didn't have to give up so much to get Sterling off the books. It's very possible that that's true. It's also possible that the deal we made right when the offseason was getting underway was as good as we were going to do. I felt bird in the hand was worth something to me, and in this case, the bird in the hand was doing what was necessary to get Sterling off of the books, because given that in the vast majority of his career he's basically been a barely replacement level pitcher or a slightly below replacement level pitcher, and he's now in his 30s and he's making what is for us on the A's not immaterial money, being willing to attach a couple of decent prospects to him is kind of the tax that we had to pay for rolling the dice on the deal with Mr. Sterling, but do appreciate the different perspectives on all of the moves that we make, and always interesting to hear a view on what others would have done differently if they had been in the same position that we are. And although, as I mentioned, we're not going to likely be big players in free agency this offseason, with only about $7 million to potentially spend and no money at all available for extensions, so we're going to be looking simply for one-year deals, there is a guy that has been very intriguing to me over the past several seasons when we've been looking for players to bolster our pitching staff, who is now a free agent. And the money this player is looking for is not significant at all, given how good they have been and how good I think they can become. And that player is Canden Reisinger, 28-year-old, spent the last couple years with Atlanta after coming up through the Dodgers organization. He's spent parts of 5 years in the majors at this point, a 2.78 ERA over 229 and 2/3 innings, 6.2 WAR, coming off of the best season of his career, 45 saves for Atlanta with an ERA of just over 2, a 3 WAR on the year. And he's only looking for $1.4 million. He is fragile, but he is a very productive pitcher who's not looking for much money at all. And typically when we've been looking at Reisinger over the past few years in trades, he's been a guy that the price tag for him hasn't been incredibly high. The reason I've been reticent about making a trade for Reisinger, and I don't know whether I want to chase him in free agency, is that the guy is kind of a jerk. He's got a lot of real negative personality traits. He's greedy. He's not a good leader. He's disloyal, and he's got a poor work ethic. And adding that somewhat combustible personality into our clubhouse has been a concern of mine, given that we would have had to give up some resources to bring him on board. But now we're only giving up money to bring him on board. And the other thing about Reisinger, although he has been primarily a reliever throughout his major league career, he does have a 3-ish pitch arsenal, although his changeup isn't particularly good, and he's got enough stamina to start. So there are a lot of interesting things about Mr. Reisinger. If you were looking closely, you'll see that he's got a disruptive personality. That's the combination of all of those negative personality traits that he has combined. But he's been a really good reliever. He's only looking for one deal. The price is not high. There is a growing part of me that thinks we roll the dice on him and just bring him in to see him in spring training. And if we have to cut him, well, we probably could trade him away given his skill set. And if we have to cut him, well, it's still only about a third of the money that we would have been paying for Levi Sterling. So we're using some of those savings on someone who might have a little bit more upside than Sterling did. When we think about team chemistry, clubhouse ecstatic in terms of team chemistry right now. DeCara with the captain personality, and we've got a bunch of leaders in the clubhouse. I think we can probably handle one disruptive player. There's no complaints about team chemistry. And like I said, I think that getting rid of someone with Reisinger's skill set with the money that he's looking for should not be that hard to do. So despite my reservations about the influence he's going to have in the clubhouse, this is a player who is certainly a high-quality major league pitcher. We're not going to guarantee him that closer role, and we'll try to save a little bit of money, $1.3 million. Part of me wants to put team options on this in case it does work out. I don't know if he's going to go for that, but if this works out well, could be a huge contract for us. We're going to see what he has to say. I have a feeling with his personality quirks, he's going to be focused on the one-year deal, and he's probably going to want to be guaranteed that closer role, but we'll see what he's got to say. If we're going to bring him on board, we want to bring him on board on our terms. Yeah, Reisinger will take a little less money, but really wants to be guaranteed that closer role. Honestly, he's probably our best option as a closer. Kamani O'Banner did fine for us last year as a closer. But Reisinger has been a 40-plus save guy 2 straight years. Maybe we offer him the closer role. With the same terms that we did last time around. Because if we're going to have him on the team, we're going to want him to play a prominent role for us. I don't know. His stuff isn't incredible, but his movement and his control are both good, and his results on the field have been pretty impressive over the course of his career. We push things too far. He is a moody fellow, so he's not in the mood to continue negotiations. I think we can potentially get him for 1 year if he's willing to come back to the table with us, but maybe I should have just done the 1 year up front, but maybe got a little bit too greedy, trying to maintain control of him for up to 3 years, depending on how he performed and how he fit in. But at least we gave it a shot, and we'll see if Reisinger ends up signing with someone else in the coming weeks, or maybe we're able to reignite those discussions in a few weeks or a month or two if he sits on the market and is not getting the type of attention that he desired. Regardless of whether I'm able to re-engage with Reisinger or not, always helpful to hear what the Worldwide Scouting Department is thinking. Should we have gone even more aggressively trying to bring him on board, or do you view him as so toxic that we shouldn't have brought him potentially into a very happy clubhouse that just won it all without him? And one of the most important players who was on our team this past season that we were not going to bring back has already signed as a free agent, Yanquiel Fernandez, who put up just a 86 WRC plus for us in 153 at-bats after we picked him up as our replacement for Bobby Cabral. We talked about trading him away earlier. So he didn't do much for us in the regular season, but he was an absolutely monster for us on the way to the playoff run. 6 homers and 13 ribbies in 50 at-bats, and a otherworldly 223 WRC plus for us. He had been saying he was looking for a little over $13 million a year for 4 years. Ended up signing early for less money and less years, $12.1 million a year over 2 years. Given the fact that we've got about $7 million for this year and no money in theory for the year after that. Would have been a bit tricky for us to potentially bring him on board. And as we've talked about previously, we think that between Taveras, Lovato, and Palomares, as well as some other players we may end up adding onto the 40-man roster ahead of the Rule 5 draft, we probably have enough outfielders to avoid giving pretty decent money to a guy who's going to be 34 years old pretty soon and looks like he may be on the downside of his career in terms of his ability to make contact, avoid strikeouts, and draw walks. And we got a little bit of bad news. One of the left-handed pitchers that we kept around this offseason, Chris Carl, injured when he fell off a bull at a rodeo and suffered a bruised shoulder. Supposedly only going to be a 3-day issue, but with the fact that we did move on from the left-handed reliever Chisen Harimoto, who we had a team option on, decided to go with Carl as the alternative. Certainly not all that excited to see him riding bulls and injuring his shoulder rather than maybe just relaxing, or who knows, perhaps even kind of preparing for trying to support our title defense in 2037. And we moved ahead to the start of the winter meetings. Finally heard back from the young outfielder Federico Aldana. Says that the offer for a minor league contract that we've made to him is fair, and he's going to sign with us unless he gets a better deal. So although we still haven't gotten the updated scouting report on him quite yet, as we talked about earlier, if we're able to sign him to a minor league contract, that's a pretty low-risk option for us, and he certainly looks on paper like he could be in the mix with the likes of Taveras, Lovato, and Palomares to be potentially fighting for a major league roster spot as a 4th or 5th outfielder, and probably one of those guys who ends up making the team coming out of spring training will probably be in the starting lineup as a corner outfielder. Could end up being a platoon situation with some of them, but there's definitely playing time up for some outfielders, and having Aldana in the organization would certainly not be the worst thing. So hopefully this will all work out. And one of the big international free agents that we had looked at and we're still waiting for a scouting report on is no longer available. That's the starting pitcher Edgar Silva, the 30-year-old out of Cuba, just signed with the Yankees for 6 years, $97.2 million, team option for the sixth and final season of that contract. So we had a feeling that the lefty was going to be operating at a financial level that we probably couldn't justify given the low scouting accuracy and the fact that we honestly don't think his stuff is incredible. Certainly would have loved to get involved with him if we knew more about him and could potentially have done it at a lower price. But as it turns out, neither of those things ended up being possible. And given that the winter meetings are now underway, we did check back in with Canden Reisinger. Still a free agent, but he's also still not in the mood to discuss anything with us. He is definitely a diva who's pretty full of himself. And as we get ready for the Rule 5 draft in a couple of days, we've been adding players to the 40-man roster, but we're also going to make a trade to get rid of a guy off the 40-man roster and get rid of a guy who I don't think we were going to put on the 40-man roster. The guy who we weren't going to have room for on the 40-man roster is Wilson Pedraza. IAFA signing from almost 7 years ago at this point. Still looks like he could be a pretty interesting player. Put up a 104 WRC plus for us this year in A-ball. Going to be 22 years old, so he's still got some work to do to be a major leaguer. Looking at his current ratings, I think a team would be hard-pressed to take him from us in the Rule 5 draft and put him onto their major league roster, but he does have potential. He's not a horrible player, not a horrible prospect by any stretch of the imagination. And to open up another spot on the current 40-man, we are finally going to move on from Omari Raphael, a player that we picked 22nd overall out of Piedmont College in 2032, 3 years after we strongly considered drafting him as a high schooler. Did make his major league debut this past year and had a 3.77 ERA in 28 and a 2/3 innings, but he did allow 4 homers and 13 walks, slightly below replacement level. Honestly, not that different, the issues with Raphael, as those that we were just talking about with Levi Sterling in terms of a proclivity to give up homers and also a tendency to give up walks as well. As much as I'd love to say Raphael is going to be a big-time pitcher, I think he's going to be kind of a 4A guy. He may get a run somewhere with somebody at some point, given that he does still have that really nice 5-pitch arsenal and good stamina. Ground ball tendencies, throws in the mid to high 90s, a lot to like about him, but with the guys that we want to put onto the 40-man roster, it ended up being a situation where we felt like we needed to get whatever value we could for Raphael and Pedraza. And we've got some young guys coming back from the Dodgers. They're going to give us $4 million in cash as well. Left fielder Jesus Carmona, don't view him as a big-time prospect, but he's a pleasant fellow to be around in the locker room and can be a good influence on others. He's certainly not as good as Pedraza. First baseman Juan Mena, another guy that's a very borderline prospect, but only 17 years old. He's durable. Don't think he's ever going to amount to anything, but he's more organizational depth. Reliever Tim Wilson is definitely a borderline prospect as well, a 14th round pick from about a year and a half ago. Looks like he could be a kind of bubble guy as far as a roster if he fully develops. The guy that we're getting back that we're most interested in, and again, he's admittedly far away, is catcher Jonah Richards. Looks like a solid defensive catcher with potentially pretty good pop in his bat. He was a 4th-round pick of the Dodgers a year ago. Hasn't done much over the last season and a half in rookie ball. Don't necessarily love any of these guys, but as I said, I wanted to open up another spot on the 40-man roster, which is why we're trading Raphael. And as I look at our 40-man roster, even though Pedraza is a reasonable potential player, a switch hitting outfielder who could have pretty decent power, he's not going to make it onto the 40-man roster. Like I said, I'm not confident that anyone's going to pick him up because I think he's so far away from being major league ready, but he's got some value now. We're bringing largely a bunch of teenagers into the organization. Don't necessarily think any of them are going to become anything, but the fact that our minor league system is starting to get a bit more productive and we've got a constant battle every year kind of churning guys at the back end of the 40-man roster makes me think that I don't know if it's the right thing to do, but the thing that I'm going to do is move on from Raphael and also move on from Pedraza in exchange for the 4 teenagers from the Dodgers organization as well as a little bit of cash. And with the trade of Raphael and Pedraza complete, that opened up a 6th spot on our 40-man roster. So we actually don't even have the capability to add anyone in the Rule 5 draft now. There are guys that we would consider trading away or just outright cutting if we needed to. So we will play it by ear when we get to the Rule 5 and see who's available. But I will show you the 6 players that we ended up adding to the 40-man roster so you can kind of think about them in comparison to Pedraza and honestly think about them if you're willing to think about things in that type of detail to the guys that we included in the trade of Levi Sterling a month and a half ago. These are the guys that we felt a little more highly about. Chuck Huntley, you may remember, he was a minor league all-star for us in 2035. 6th-round pick. Really think he could have interesting stuff, plus movement and plus control. 4-pitch arsenal. Does not have the stamina to be a starter, but he was pretty strong between high A ball and double A year ago. Did not want to risk losing the potentially interesting left-handed reliever. Joe Harmon, 2nd-round pick of ours in 2032. Love the speed, love the defensive ability, love the personality. The question is how good the bat is ultimately going to be. He did have a 146 WRC plus last year in A-ball and then a 120 in 130 at-bats in Double A. Definitely going to be more of a glove pinch runner, 4th or 5th outfielder type guy unless we get really lucky with that bat, but still want to continue investing in Mr. Harmon going forward. Amari Alcindor, an 8th-round pick from that same draft in 2032. Guy who can play multiple positions in the infield, although his arm is not particularly good. Decent speed, solid bunter, and potentially really good gap power and home run power for us. Didn't want to risk losing Mr. Alcindor. The 3 other guys that we added, Jonathan Scherer, a reliever, 15th round pick from 2031. He's a guy who's just had a unexpectedly positive development for a right-handed pitcher. Looks like he's pretty much ready for the majors right now at 23. We think he could be a pretty interesting reliever with that fastball slider combo. Put up a 0.42 ERA in his first 21 2/3 innings in Double A last year. Just turned 23 years old a couple of weeks ago. Juan Campos, a 4th-round draft pick from 2032. Combined to go 6-1 between A and high A ball in 12 starts last year. Fragile physically, had some injury issues last year, but still a potential 3-pitch arsenal, but potentially 3 excellent pitches. A lot of positive personality tendencies, throws in the mid to high 90s. We think his stuff could be really interesting, so wanted to keep Campos in the organization. And then the 6th guy, Daniel Blanco, a starting pitching prospect who was a 9th-round pick in that 2032 draft, combined to go 17-3 between A and high A for us this past year with sub-2 ERAs at both levels. Another guy, as you'd expect, given the way we draft, very positive personality traits. Stuff a bit questionable, but think his movement and control could both be well above average. Definitely going to be a borderline starter unless we can improve that stamina down the line, but wanted to guarantee that we didn't lose Mr. Blanco as well. So felt like there was a lot of interesting talent in the lower levels of the organization, and we'll be heading into the Rule 5 with a full 40-man roster. And we've made it to the Rule 5 draft. As I noted, we're at 40 players on the 40-man roster right now, so if we're going to do anything interesting, we're going to have to continue juggling our roster. But would expect, as we often have in recent years, we'll lose several 4A type of guys, and even with the 6 guys we protected and the at this point probably another 4 or 5 guys that we've traded away over the last month and a half who were either on the 40-man roster or were prospects to be on the 40-man roster. Wouldn't be shocked if we lose a couple of guys in their early 20s as well. And we have already lost 4 guys before we've even made a pick. 2 of them were kind of the 4A guys we've talked about, 29-year-old Juan Maduena, and then Justin LeBron, who was an important player for us for a couple of seasons a while back. He was in our minor league organization last year. Doesn't really have the bat at this point, in my opinion, to be a major leaguer, but still a really good influence in the clubhouse, and not shocked to see him go. Also lost a couple of guys who were borderline for being added to the 40-man roster, and obviously we went in different positions. Esteban Meza, a very good fielding middle infielder. 25-year-old, is fragile physically. Only made it up to Double-A for us last year, where he was admittedly productive offensively. Still question his bat a bit. He's a pure glove kind of guy. Weren't sure whether he was going to get picked or not, but Meza, who is a player who we picked up in a trade, the ill-fated trade back in 2028, when we dealt away Jacob Misiorowski in one of the worst trades we've ever been involved in, although Misiorowski continues to walk batters at a crazy rate with 35 over 62 and a third innings this year and 11 home runs allowed, 4.62 ERA for him working out of the bullpen in Milwaukee. He was below replacement level this year at 34 years old. Kind of had Levi Sterling-esque numbers, but he has certainly had a good run since we moved him on board. Got Meza in return for that trade, and interestingly, he's back to the Rockies organization. Also lost Danny Augustine, another 25-year-old. He's a guy who we had in Double-A last year. I believe we picked him up in a trade with the Braves. Yeah, he was part of the trade where we dealt Sergio Campos to Atlanta after he really struggled for us. And Augustine, to me, was another borderline guy to protect. Right-handed hitting outfielder, pretty average defensively, average speed, decent contact hitter, question his power. Was very productive for us in Double-A last year, but wasn't someone we were willing to put onto the 40-man roster either. Or I guess to describe it more accurately, we would have considered putting him on the 40-man roster if there weren't 40 other players in our organization that we preferred to Danny Augustine. And we, unfortunately, didn't find anyone who was all that interesting available by the time we were drafting. Lost one more player in the subsequent rounds, Dusty Ruyard, another 25-year-old that we were unable to protect, a relief pitcher who looks like a potentially respectable major leaguer. Interestingly, he's another guy that we had picked up in the trade of Sergio Campos, so obviously not a great return by losing Augustine and Ruyard both in the Rule 5 draft. We still do have Juan Lovato in the organization. He, for whatever reason, is still listed as the number 5 prospect in baseball, although when we look at our actual minor league system rankings, he's nowhere to be seen. But I don't know if that's just a bug in the game at this point or what. But Lovato, who, as we've talked about, is likely going to be fighting for a 4th or 5th outfielder spot for us this upcoming season, is kind of the only guy left from the Campos trade for us, although it's very conceivable that Mr. Royard or Mr. Augustine could end up getting sent back to us if they don't end up spending the entire season on the major league roster of their the teams that picked them from us in the draft. And with the Rule 5 draft complete, we'll call it an episode. We're going to continue moving on with free agency next time around and hopefully sim all the way up to the beginning of the IAFA signing period. Before we finish off the next episode, we'll do, I don't want to say a deep dive, but we'll at least preview the players who are available for us to bid on, as it's always helpful to hear what the worldwide scouting department recommends. As we sit here on Christmas Eve 2036, still waiting to hear what Mr. Aldana wants to do. He supposedly favors our minor league offer. We did get a scouting report back on him. We've got another one out there to hopefully get to very high scouting accuracy. Doesn't look materially different than we had thought he did. Still would definitely love to bring him into the organization. And if you're wondering about the other potential target that we talked about, Canden Reisinger, he is still on the free agent market, and he is still not interested in discussing anything with us right now. But we are keeping our eye on Reisinger and hoping that we will maybe get Aldana locked up in the not too distant future. And with that, we will call it an episode. Until the next time, thanks so much for watching. Hope you have a great day. And for those of you who are across the pond in London, go Jets!